have a question about your cunt that you were too embarrassed to pose? Like, if I don't have sex for the next 8 years, will my pussy hole close? Well, buckle up, school's in session. These sex pros have planned a lesson, 'cause cunts aren't just for reproduction. Whether you were born with it or it's under construction, open your ears, 'cause the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.
Hello, and welcome to the Clam Jam. I'm Vienna. I'm the Cuntsultant, your host on this Clam Jam experience. And hello to everyone who's joining us live, and hello to those of you watching this later as the replay. Welcome to the past / how's the future. So today on the Clam Jam, we will be joined with the fabulous Samantha Zipporah, who is one of my favorite people, favorite mentors, favorite teachers. I have learned so much from Sam, just like over the years, like hearing her on podcasts, coming across her blog, on my own journey with fertility awareness, and just like learning more about my body and how can I have a relationship with my vagina and female self that perhaps wasn't handed to me in school, but one I really deeply value. So I remember, I think the very first time I learned about Sam was on the Fifth Vital Sign podcast. And I think that's what it was called. And talking about menstrual extraction. And my mind was just blown. It's like, I need to find all this person's work and follow them and take all of them, take their brain and get in there and learn more. And I've just been learning from Samantha ever since. So she is a radical worker. I'm not going to even read the whole bio because I'll let her do some introducing of herself, but she is someone that you must know about. So with all that being said, welcome Samantha and happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. Yes, tonight is the first night. I'll be doing a Zoom candle with my mom and some other friends. Yes.
Very cool.
Thank you for that introduction. And I forgot that's how you found me. And that was one of my very, very first podcast interviews ever. So you got in at the beginning.
It was a long time. I think that must have been like, I'm trying to, like, I have a visual memory of
4 years.
I think it was like 2014 or 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was married and living on a farm in Oregon.
Yeah, I was about to get married. I was living with my ex-husband. And that's so funny. I mean, maybe that's a whole other conversation about the marriages. I mean, that's a fun topic to get into, about like why that happened. Sacred, hey, definitely in that realm. But yeah, tell the people who somehow don't know about you a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. I started studying before I started bleeding. I was 11 years old with my book and my highlighter and taking notes. And I thought that I could figure it out intellectually. This very like Cartesian machine sort of perspective coming into of like, how does this thing work? The thing being my reproductive and sexual health in general, because I saw my mom and my sister being really ill and suffering a lot. And like, just some part of me was like, that's not how it's supposed to be. And then I started volunteering at Planned Parenthood. I attended my first abortion as a teenager. I started studying to be a midwife and attending births when I was 19, spent the majority of my 20s attending births on call in Portland, Oregon. And I've always been, I shouldn't say always, but I started practicing fertility awareness at 19 also. And I have pretty much always through that the whole spectrum supported people with abortions. And then it was early 20s when I started supporting miscarriages because it's just when they found me. So yeah, the womb continuum is the language that I use. The whole continuum, your orgasms, your yeast infections, your pregnancies, all of it. I'm there for it. Here to provide education and inspiration. Yeah, there's my intro for now. I'm an anarchist. I'm a mystic.
Yeah.
A witch.
And that's why we love you. Yes, witch, absolutely. Yeah. I will say, I mean, something that I think about a lot with you is your I don't know what the right word is, but like the language that you use. Essentially.
Yes.
And so great phrases that we now have: womb continuum, or, you know, reproductive continuum, and pregnancy release. And I think pregnancy release is such, like, I was thinking about this. I was watching one of your lives the other day and just thinking about, like, there's a way that you kind of just like cut through all of the superficialness of an issue and just say, well, what is it actually? Like, what are we actually?
What is it? What are you actually talking about?
What's the core of this, as opposed to like all, you know, and the core of it is like you release a pregnancy. And so be that through, you know, an elective or decided upon abortion, like you're like, hey, we're just not having this pregnancy and I'm making a conscious decision in some way or another to end it, be that a miscarriage, which often is not a conscious decision to end a pregnancy, but is technically also an abortion, medically speaking. But what does that actually mean? It means you've released a pregnancy. And then, of course, like a full-term pregnancy, which could also be a stillbirth or could be a living baby. But like, what is it? Technically speaking, you are releasing a pregnancy. So there's many instances, and I'm sure they'll come up as we speak, that I feel like you just like, okay, yeah, it's all these things, but it's also like specifically it's this. And I really appreciate
it's something that I'm proud of it, and it's a wonderful skill. It's a blessing and a curse. And I feel like moving into my emotional body, which we'll discuss a bit more, I'm sure, moving forward when we talk about the sacred yes with pregnancy, with contraception, with any and all things in your life. But yeah, I love making meaning. I love etymology, like knowing where this word comes from and wanting to actually use the word that will communicate exactly what I mean, rather than falling back on colloquial common language. Because a lot of the time, especially when we're talking about our bodies, our sexual and reproductive bodies, the normal vernacular, the regular language that people are using is slightly incorrect.
Yeah.
Or inaccurate or misogynist, or creates like a value judgment or an emotional reaction that is not helping us understand what is real about the situation. And I guess being somebody who has like synesthesia and psychic dreams and has a really deep relationship with the spiritual and emotional realms, the ephemeral world, like actually grounding experiences in physiology and science, for me, helps me feel more able to explore the other realms honestly, so I'm not confusing like the root of the issue.
Sure.
So that, yeah.
Oh, totally. I can completely relate to that. And I think like language, like words mean things. And we can actually, we could spend some time talking about words that mean things.
Let's talk about
vagina and doula and words. Right. We could just start there.
Doula, vagina. Yeah. I'm a retired doula, I say sometimes.
Yeah. I love the word though. So but just to say, there is like, I remember like part of my journey of like where I came to this, it was at like some young age of like 10 or something, being like, you know what, I'm going to learn the names of my genitalia. Like somehow I picked up something about like how that was important for children to learn. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to get that. And then no one can take that away from me. And so knowing like the actual terminology versus like, you know, using a euphemism, like, you know, your even like pussy, right? Or saying something like that, or even cunt, right? There's that word, which are great words and I fully endorse them. But I love using like the technical language, even though we could also say like the technical language itself has some problems, but like, what is it we're actually speaking to, and being very hyper specific about that. And then we can go other places. But to your point, like you need to have the foundation and an agreed upon foundation. And then we can say like, yes, and also it's all these other experiences that are subjective and personal to you. And those are totally valid and great. But so we can all kind of get on the same playing field.
Right. Oh, so many little chords are like shooting off to different topics I'd love to talk to you about. I want to just take it back to the pregnancy release.
Yeah.
And how that relates to contraception, as well as please bleed.
Yeah.
And like part of why I like to normalize this the phrase pregnancy release for any type of a pregnancy, no matter what the outcome is, birth, miscarriage, abortion, stillbirth, any of it, right? We held a pregnancy, we released it, there was a birthing process, there should be a postpartum process, is getting into that perspective where we respect the universal physiology of this process, and we can learn about the function of the endometrium, right? The function of contractions, the reality of what kind of nourishment we need to rebuild our blood, the high mineral foods that we need, no matter why we're bleeding, right? The things that our uterus needs to support it, no matter why it's having a contraction, are universal, regardless of these wildly, vastly different emotional, social processes, right? Like a lot of people don't connect why like the same foods or the same activities are really important in your postpartum from any kind of pregnancy release or any kind of menstruation experience.
Yeah.
So the like the physiology, like the nerves and the tissues and the muscles of your body and the hormones in your body don't have the cultural biases.
Right. Yeah.
Or the stigmas in their functionality. Like they're just going to do their thing. So if you understand how that physical reality works, then I feel, and like you're able to address pain and avoid suffering by caring for that physiology, then I feel like we have so much more room as individuals to explore, well, how do I feel about this? Yeah. Like, what do I think about this? What kind of meaning do I want to make of this? Instead of like, what the fuck is going on with my uterus and my vagina, and why is this happening? And like, how do I deal with this?
I think that's super important. And I think you're totally right. It reminds me, I'm like tripping all over my words. It reminds me that I can't remember who did I learn. I think it was a Hidden Brain podcast episode. Mm. They were talking about religion and this man who studies religion as like a social construct. And it was very interesting. And I cannot remember his name.
Is it the one with the punitive God?
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps it's punitive God. But what the point he makes is that human beings are the only creature that has, like, you're born with two sets of genetics, essentially, or like you're born with like the genetics that are in your actual body. And then you're also born with like social genetics, which I think I'm butchering it. I'll find it. I'll post it.
It's a fascinating podcast. I have a blog post about it.
I'll find, yeah.
When I was on an ancestral pilgrimage.
Right. Okay. Yes. So that's a whole other thing. But so my point there being like our bodies, like our so he says basically like, for example, fire. If we weren't born with like the cultural history and knowledge of fire, if we aren't given that, we can't survive because our bodies have actually developed to need fire. So to live. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. But kind of in the same way of like, our physiology is going to do whatever the fuck it's going to do. Our bodies are designed to work in a certain way. We at some point inherit or are given, or hopefully at another point make our own meaning of what that means for us personally. So if you, again, to the, I think this live you did the other day about like, what does contraception look like throughout the ages? Contraception throughout the ages was infanticide in a lot of ways. And that's like actual.
I shouldn't be laughing, but I'm just like, real talk,
right? So,
like we're not debating whether or not abortion is ethical. Like, infanticide was pretty normal in a lot of cultures until very recently.
And that has changed and like that evolves, right? So, but this idea that you make that meaning, we all make that meaning for ourselves, either personally or collectively. But what our bodies do is like just nature unfolding, and there's no good or bad. It just is what is. And then we love to like make meaning.
It is into the religious, mystical stuff.
Yeah. And so then we like to make meaning that says like, this is good and this is bad, or this is pathological and this is normal and healthy. And I think that also comes to play in here. We're like, well, is it pathological or is it just like also an unfolding? And is it normal and healthy or is it actually a problem? Just because like I was on a lecture earlier with Jenny Coos of Wolverine, and she made this point of like, normal just means common. It doesn't necessarily mean healthy. It just means like most people experience that.
Do you know Michelle O'Donnell's work?
Ooh, I'm not
Michelle
sure.
O'Donnell. I always forget that you're not super in the birth world. He's a French obstetrician.
Okay.
I quote him in my miscarriage and abortion support course from an 8-hour workshop I got to take with him at a midwifery conference once. He's pretty much responsible for water birth existing in hospitals. Like, he did the clinical data. One of my other favorite impressions of him to do is like, I spent 20 years trying to prove to the medical community that a baby needs his mother.
Wow.
They were just taking the babies away immediately. And so he had to use clinical data and science to get babies back onto skin. Anyway, the quote that was just from this live lecture that I took from him, no book, that's like really changed my life, is what is cultural is normal, and what is physiologic is universal.
Yeah, I want to do snaps or something.
So that, when we're talking about our reproductive capacities, when we're talking about our sexuality and how we practice contraception or how we practice abortion, all of this, what I want is to make sure that people have the universal truths of the physiology, that they have access to that education, so that they can actually choose which aspects of their culture they want to participate in, or how they want to shift culture more commonly in my audience and friend group, right?
Yeah.
And so that comes to the contraception versus birth control.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the language and concepts, and like the parody that I need to revive. It's been completely lost to the ages. But at one point I had a rap parody to Naughty by Nature's OPP.
Of course you did.
Right? That was like how I'm not down with the ovulation prevention pill.
It's good. It's good.
And that I wish, I mean, specifically for oral contraception, I really wish that we would just call it the ovulation prevention pill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's what it does. It does not trick your body into thinking it's pregnant. It doesn't prevent you from conceiving by interrupting the sperm. It just completely suppresses the egg.
Right.
So, and I still slip up on that, but that's just one idea that I would love to popularize for people in our language, that contraception to counter conception is a nicer term than birth control for most of the ways that we're avoiding pregnancy, and that actually avoiding conception, we're getting more to the root, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, we're smart enough to understand ovulation. We're smart enough to understand the different ways that we can make sure the sperm doesn't meet the egg. And the term birth control, I find, is very reductionist, as if we can't understand that if you don't conceive, you will not gestate and birth.
Yeah.
And controlling birth is like horribly sadistic and fucked up.
And impossible.
And very actually commonly attempted in our culture. And yeah. I'm pretty sure that we're still less than 5% in our country of people are having unmedicated vaginal deliveries without synthetic hormones or narcotics interrupting the process. So we try and control the outcome.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Right?
Yeah.
But so that went a little tangential.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing
and birth control, that's another one of my little language nitty gritty things that I love to be like, I don't want to control birth.
Yeah.
I want to avoid conceiving.
Well, like, back it all the way up. I will say, before we back it all the way up, Justice likes to refer to hormonal birth control as contraceptive endocrine disruptors. We like
accurate.
Yeah, like a little. It's I would say ovulation prevention pill is. They're both good. I feel like it's like slightly more accessible than like contraceptive.
To most people, because some people don't even know what an endocrine system is.
Totally.
Still.
So. But that is what they do. They do things. Ooh, I went away. They do things to our bodies. Can you still hear me? I got
you. Yeah.
All right. it do things, essentially all hormonal birth control does something to our bodies to, in some way, shape, or form, make us unwell enough to avoid getting pregnant. Like, that's kind of the basis of it. It's like it's fucking up your system enough to prevent pregnancy, which oftentimes means it's making you unwell in some way in order to prevent pregnancy.
Interrupting the communication is my favorite terminology to use. It's like your ovaries need to talk to your brain on a regular basis. If they're not in communication, shit's gonna get fucked up.
Exactly.
Like, so we need them to be like, hello. Like, we need the line of communication to be open. And there's no way to block that line of communication without also interrupting the communication between, you know, your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and like all of these other functions in the body.
Well, and then it's kind of like if you get ghosted, right? It's like basically you're ghosting the ovaries are ghosting the brain. And no one likes to be ghosted. It's like very uncomfortable and it makes us upset. So like think about your brain and your hypothalamus and your pituitary.
Mommy.
Hey, where are you?
I mean, this needs to be animated.
I mean, that's the next step. But then let's go all the way back. So let's start there's the controlling of birth, which is kind of its own thing and a different thing than what we're talking about. And then there's contraception. And then there's just like avoid pregnancy. Like, what do we have to do to not get pregnant in the first place? So then we don't have to do any further intervention.
Right. Starts with this real basic thing that to enforce and practice properly involves completely ending rape culture.
Step one.
Step one, end rape culture.
Easy.
So that the sperm never gets in the vagina without us wanting it there. Unless there's like just an oops. And oopses happen.
Mm-hmm. All the time. With
of the book Please Bleed, which for a while it was titled Oops.
Which is a really good title.
Oops. Plants and Practical Magic for if you accidentally get sperm in your vagina.
It's a good title.
Which is still good. We could still change it because the ebook's coming out hopefully in the next week. But I don't know. I like Please Bleed.
They're both good. You can't really go wrong.
I think Please Bleed is more like affirmative, and it's really perfect for the conversation about the sacred yes, right?
Yeah.
Because being holistic and health-minded and respectful of our cycle as part of nature, as something that we want to be encouraging our ovaries and our brain to be talking to each other. We want to be saying yes to ovulation and yes to menstruation more than we want to be saying no to a pregnancy, to help balance out the totally catastrophic, orgasm killing, sovereignty destroying fear that most of our peers are operating under when it comes to conception and pregnancy. Right? Like, so sacred yes, like mini talk. It's just like, I hate to be so hippy dippy reductionist on some level. And I also just feel like it's really legit that the vast majority of our decisions are either rooted in love or they're rooted in fear. And that particularly when it comes to my vagina and my uterus and in general in life, I really want to root myself in love. And that there's healthy function for fear and caution, absolutely. But it's out of balance in most people's psyches when it comes to our ability to conceive or become pregnant when we're not wanting to. Most people make their contraceptive decisions and take their contraceptive actions or their abortive actions based in this fear that they don't, no baby, no baby, no baby, no baby. And it's like fully focused on the no. Mm-hmm. And so the concept of the sacred yes has evolved for me out of helping people name and claim what it is that they want that is not a pregnancy or a child.
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging and illuminating this reality that our no is never existing in a vacuum. We're never saying no for no reason, just to be obstinate. We're always saying no because there's something that we want to say yes to. And that on the most basic practical level, to have the healthy communication between the ovaries and the brain, and to have a healthy endocrine system, our contraceptive method should be one where we are saying yes to ovulation and yes to menstruation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fully agree. And I think what it reminds me of is this kind of everything you just said, we're going to get in there again. But it reminds me of this idea oftentimes that people will experience where you spend your whole, or the first half of your reproductive life doing everything in your power to prevent pregnancy. So you're like, let's say you get sexually active at 16 and you have a uterus and the ability to get pregnant, and you go on the pill because you're like, I don't, and it's kind of
the
like
worst thing that could happen.
Yeah, that's how I felt as a young person.
Yeah.
I was like, pregnancy, I don't want to do that. I'm going to avoid it. It's worse than death. So, and that was very common. And so you spend, so let's say you go on the pill or something similar at 16 because you're like, fuck that, no babies, other things to do. I will not be held down by a pregnancy. And then, 16 years later, or maybe longer, maybe shorter, you're like, I'd really like to have a baby right now. Actually, now is the perfect time to have a baby. Let's have a baby. I've been told my whole life I can just get pregnant if I look at someone with sperm. It's so easy. Like, you got to do all these crazy things to avoid it. I have to suffer depression, loss of libido, all these other things, all these other crazy things that could happen with the hormonal birth control. And then you go off of it and then you try to get pregnant and you can't get pregnant. And so then you're spending this whole time, you spent your life up until that point being like, no babies, no babies, no babies. And then it switches and you're like, oh, I desperately want a baby, or I'm going to try for a baby. Yeah. And you've put in, just, this is all theoretical, knowing that's a very challenging place to be and common. And not to dismiss any of the grief or to blame anyone, but just to say that
no longer smells good and you don't even want to fuck them.
Right. You're like, what, who is this person that I married and I'm having a baby with? I don't know who they are. Hormones.
Just side note for anybody who might be watching a replay and doesn't already know, there are actual studies around contraception and pheromones and attraction, and the reality that being on hormonal contraception, or what's the justice? Contraceptive endocrine disruptors also disrupt your primal biological intuitive intelligence for choosing a mate.
Yeah.
And so the decision you made while you were on endocrine disruptors is not necessarily going to be the same decision you would have made had your ovaries been communicating with your brain.
Hadn't ghosted them. Yeah.
Right? You want your ovaries to communicate with your brain while you choose a mate.
Yeah. And there's the book, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, I think, right? By Sarah Hill.
I haven't read it yet.
I've read parts of it, but she makes the point in there. She's like, you are your hormones. We are our hormones, for better or for worse. We are. And so when you change your hormones, you actually change who you are. Completely. And again, just physiology.
The definition of a hormone is something that changes your body on a cellular level.
There you go.
It's the most fundamental you can get.
Yeah. Well, so, and then going back to the situation where not only have you been telling your cells on a cellular level, hey, we're not doing pregnancy because this is a body that cannot support a pregnancy. Because that's, again, what contraceptive endocrine disruptors, hormonal birth control is doing. The OPT is saying this body is not a body that a pregnancy can live in. Most of the time, knowing all birth control methods, all contraception can fail. But that being said, you not only have done that on a cellular level, you've also done it, if we're going to talk emotional, spiritual, mental, you have made a space in which there is no baby. And you've done that for many, many years. So
we've created neural pathways.
Yeah. So it is within the realm of reason that it's going to take some time for you to both physiologically, mentally, and emotionally, and perhaps spiritually shift to a new perspective.
Yeah.
And if we're doing that all out of fear, and it is a lot of fear and it's a lot of no, I would say again, to your point, shift it and say, how can we come at this from like under what is it actually that we're trying to do? It's not that like we are necessarily anti-baby. Maybe we are, but like it's not necessarily that you're just like no pregnancy and that's the only thing you're focused on, because you're saying no to a pregnancy because you're doing a bunch of other stuff that you're saying yes to.
Right.
Focusing on that. And then how do you make your body the best body in, you know,
to do what you want to do, to actually use your consciousness, to invest your vital essence in what you desire instead of what you are avoiding or what you shun. Yeah.
It's like shadow work too. It's like a little bit of
shadow work. And it's a basic psychological, like Psychology Today article data you could look up around the total difference when we focus on what we want versus what we do not want.
Yeah.
The way that our brains work and the way that we're able to achieve our goals. So
well, and I would also say, like, to add on to that, so this is the other piece of it, is we're spending the whole time saying no to our fertility, because that's it, right? Because we've been taught that your fertility only means making babies. And so fertility, you know, it's like an F word, like, get it away from me. Like, no, thank you. No fertility. And I know I 100% have had that mindset myself, like as a young person, when I was like starting to chart also around like 12, I think I found an internet webpage I was doing it on. But my whole thing was just like, no, I remember having these experiences. It was like, I know if I'm a little, like if I didn't have enough body fat, I couldn't get pregnant. So I had these like pieces. And so there was a whole like part of, you know, I guess trigger warning for anyone who's had like eating disorder or disordered eating in this way, but having some like, you know, trying to repress my food intake and then like exercise a lot. And I knew like I would weigh myself and be like, oh, like my weight got down into like, like the mid, like I was probably like 115 pounds, which is pretty thin for my frame. And I was young, I was probably like 17. And I saw my cycle get super fucked up. Like I had like a 40-day cycle. And there was this experience I had at that age with this tiny bit of knowledge I had. I was like, well, look at how cool that is. Like I was proud of myself. I was proud of how much I had like altered my physiology to alter my cycle to prevent a pregnancy. Not that I was even sexually active, but like I had that thought. And so then we spend our whole time being like, or that whole period of time being like, my fertility is a problem. My fertility, it's a liability.
It's a pathology.
It's a pathology. And therefore I take all these, you know, I got to like disrupt my endocrine system in order to prevent me from accessing that because it's so bad and only for baby making.
Right.
And then you're just like, you are shooting yourself in the foot health-wise. And we all have different levels of functioning. So like what your level of unwellness on a contraceptive endocrine disruptor is different than someone else's for sure. But what we do know is that none of us are actually fully functioning if we're on hormonal birth control. And of course there's some asterisks over there for reasons that people go on hormonal birth control or contraceptive endocrine disruptors for certain medical issues, harm reduction. We'll put some asterisks around all that.
But it's 100% way overly distributed.
Completely.
And people also have this idea that they need it when they don't.
Which is absolutely, and I guess what I'm thinking of kind of like very extreme cases of like cancer or like endometriosis that you have no other way to control bleeding. I'm really, so that's what I'm thinking, like extremes, but not like I have acne and like nothing will take away my acne except the pill. Like I understand it's a burden, but like there are other methods. There are other ways that you can handle that. So you're just continuously saying no to who you're saying no to aspects of your body from this place of fear. And in fact, we don't need to be as afraid because we have all these other tools available to us that would be rooted from a yes and a loving place of our bodies and ourselves. And that is not what's given to us readily by our culture.
Right. Yeah. It, for the record too, like it 100% came out of my abortion care practice before I applied for contraception.
Yeah. Which is fair. Like I think all,
you know, like you want to birth. What are you wanting to gestate and birth in your life? What are you wanting to invest your fertile vital essence in that is not this child? And how do we make meaning out of it by focusing on the yes?
Yeah. Yeah. And just to like back up just to say too, like it's okay to start at the place of being afraid and saying no, because that is like what's
Sure.
and then but we're over here to say there's another way you could do this, actually. Like you
probably feel better. And that's kind of like, I just wrote the afterword at the very end. I wrote the afterword at the very end.
Makes sense.
Before getting please bleed to my design darling friend. And it's like, cool, I want to share all this accurate information with you, which might blow your mind and you need access to, and is really hard to get access to from reliable, clear sources about how plants can help us avoid pregnancy and the physiology of the way that plants can affect our biochemistry and our nerves and our muscles and our tissues and how that affects our fertility. Bookmark. But that in the afterword, and I was like, drawn from the well deep of just like, I really want to share the feeling that I have. Like, yay, accurate information, so fucking important. Human right, knowledge is power. But more so, I want people to feel as fearless as I feel around pregnancy and sexuality.
Yeah.
It is so liberating to not fear pregnancy and to have a really active, fulfilling sex life with a partner who makes sperm. And to feel totally confident that I'm aware of my fertile window and I'm aware of my ovulation and I'm aware of and in good communication about where the sperm goes with my partner. And then if there's an oops, I feel really confident that I can use plants and practical magic to make sure that I have a period instead of a pregnancy. And it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
And it's not nearly as harmful as pharmaceuticals or surgery are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no clinical data around it. And the information has been suppressed and stigmatized for so long that it feels really frightening to a lot of people. But it's been my experience within my own body and with my dear beloveds who I've supported through this. I never give protocol recommendation to clients or students because I'm not an herbalist and it's a little out of my realm. Like I'm aware of and like I use the herbs with my own body, but I'm not a clinical herbalist.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's bodies are so unique. Maybe someday, like that's on my short list of things that I'm like, maybe I will do more of a deep dive someday with that. But yeah, I've seen people who practice fertility awareness and cycle awareness who have accidents with sperm use the information and the tools and the skills that I'm sharing in this book. And I personally have used the tools and the skills and the ideas I'm sharing in this book to get our periods and not be pregnant.
Yeah.
When we are viscerally either certain or highly suspicious that we have conceived.
Yeah.
So I'll take a pause there and just like see, because I know that that's like, there's some really next level body literacy is what I'm inviting in Please Bleed. Some really next level body literacy and proactive response ability.
Yes. And so that I think that is part of what scares people, right? So it is taking, there's, again, it's fun. I like to say, like, to any of my clients when we start doing fertility awareness education, I'm like, it's a little bit psychoactive. Like, it's gonna get into, you're gonna think like, oh, I'm just paying attention to my period. I'm just looking at my mucus. I'm just writing it down this piece of paper, and I'm gonna like learn when not to have sex. But it's gonna do other stuff to you, and that can be all kinds of things. But one of the things that comes up for people frequently is like, this is so, it's like, it's annoying that I have to do this. It is like, I don't want to have to pay attention to this. So like this level of annoyance or just like irritation with it. And this idea, like the additional layer of responsibility that you and your partner have to take on. And I see it's not just male partner, people with sperm, right? Who are like, I don't want to do this. It's both. And oftentimes it can be like the person without the sperm who's as irritated. But what the thing that we have been offered easily by our culture and our science is that you can take some kind of form of, contraception that you don't have to think about and you don't have to know anything about, and then you don't have to engage with that part of your physiology at all.
Who benefits, right? This is whatever our consumer choices are, we need to recognize that they have impacts not just in our own body and our own physiology, but economically and politically, and people are not questioning their convenience and their consumerism.
And environmentally, and for generations to come, right? So actually impact. Ooh. It was dramatic. Your lights like flickered or dropped.
Yeah, I dropped a push pin.
Perfect. There you go. But what's actually reminding me in this moment is it's like the Little Mermaid, right? So she desperately wants to like go be a human and like walk around with humans, and she's this like magical, mystical creature that gets to have this whole other beautiful experience as a magical, mystical creature. But she's like, I want to see what they're doing over here. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I want to like, see what it's like to not have a tail and to like be in a different environment. And I am combining both like the original and like the Disney one. But like, so Ursula comes along,
right?
Right. The sea witch comes along and she's like, I can give that to you. You can have what you want. You can stop like thinking about being a mermaid and like having a fin and instead just have legs, but you have to give me your voice. And so you have to give me like this essence of like how you express yourself and how you are in the world. If we do that trade, you can have the thing you want. And she's like, sure, absolutely. I want to go see this. And then, she can't have the full experience because she's missing a vital element. And then of course we know that story goes in a bunch of different directions.
Have you read with the Wolves?
I've read parts of it. I haven't read the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm just like a Clarissa Pinkola Estes analysis of the Little Mermaid as fertility.
Does it exist?
Right? No, it doesn't. Oh. It's right in line with when she analyzes Bluebeard from a feminist perspective and all these other myths.
Yeah,
and I love where you're. I mean, not the Disney version, but the original version of the Little Mermaid, 100%.
Which then ends in like murder, right?
Suicide and murder.
Yeah, it's real cute. But kind of thinking about that in like the same kind of idea that yes, you can have a form of contraception that will allow you to just stop thinking about it and just cut off access to one certain part of yourself, and that might be fully acceptable to you, or you think it is. Again,
as long as it's 100% exclusive, which almost nobody has when they start that path.
Absolutely. Or you can have a form of contraception that requires your full participation in having your body and having your fin. And accepting that the fact that you are in fact a mermaid and you have a uterus that will potentially hold a pregnancy. But you're going to have to like take responsibility for, I don't know where the metaphor falls apart, but it takes another layer of responsibility and proactiveness. And we have been taught, and I think there's a level to which like you can say like we've been taught, and so you can't blame ourselves, but at a certain point when you know, right? And then to butchers at Maya Angelou, who says like, when you know better, do better.
It's in the I quote that exact quote.
Yeah.
I'm talking about contraception.
And it's like, so you can make whatever choice is appropriate for your body, and we will honor and say you are the only one who knows that. But being on this side of things and having been on the other side of things, saying, look, none of us are really fully told this. And yes, it takes a certain level of responsibility, but it's responsibility worth having because of the benefits that it does, not only for your own physiology, but potentially for any relationship that you have. There's, again, with like going back to the science of like, are you choosing an appropriate mate? That can have impacts on all kinds of different things. So not only like your personal relationship with that person, but potentially the relationship of any children you have with that person or family, like being people who went through divorces, you and I both, right? You lose a lot of things. Even if you don't have children that you lose in those marriages, you still lose other things. And my marriage did not end because of birth control. Like that was not part of it. But it happens, right? So you're actually, the sacrifice is much greater than we're presented. We're presented as like, it's no big deal, but it can impact not only like your health like now and your health as an older person, and also your relationships, your mood, your sense, like your quality of life,
Mhm.
And those are
The capacity of fish in the waterways.
say it again.
The reproductive. Am I echoing?
Something weird's happening with the sound. Yeah.
Yeah, it's echoing on my part. But I'm just like pedaling through it. The reproductive capacity of fish
Yes.
is one of the scientific studies we have.
Yeah.
Is that synthetic hormonal contraception is inhibiting and creating hermaphrodite fish that can no longer reproduce because they're inundated with the hormones that we're taking out from our contraception and our menopause.
Yeah.
How's it doing over there?
It's okay. Do you want me to pop you out and pop you back in?
I can do this thing I did earlier, which
Yeah, do that.
And then it was better last time, and it's better now.
Okay, great, perfect.
Mute and unmute.
There you go.
Did you turn it off? Let's talk about consent.
Yeah, but the last thing I want to say there is just like, well, just that part of like this idea that we make these choices for ourselves, but our choices actually and this I believe is something I learned from Geraldine Mattis, who is one of my teachers at Justice, is like we make decisions for ourselves, but there's no such thing as a decision that doesn't impact other things. So none of us exist in a vacuum. Nature doesn't exist in a vacuum. We are nature. So we make choices, and those choices have ripple effects. And that is neither good nor bad. It is just what it is. And one of the ripple effects of taking hormonal birth control and having that contraceptive option, which again, rape culture exists. It's still necessary in many cases. Yeah. But if you have the ability and interest, and we'll go into consent next, when you choose to take hormonal contraception, you are actually making a choice to impact the environment around you in many negative ways. And it doesn't have, and then there's a whole other conversation about bringing children into the world and what does that do for the environment. But none of these choices are without additional ramifications that impact not just our own selves, but a wide mycelium connection of other creatures and things. So,
and who does it serve?
Who does it serve? Yeah.
Which I have to again. Over there too?
It's a little muddy, but I don't hear an echo.
Okay. Trying again. So I just want to bring up consent and fertility awareness method conversation and trauma, which is, I feel like, really lacking. And I'm like, maybe I should check what time it is. We got 10 minutes more. I just want to drop the bomb.
And then walk away. No, we can go as long as you want. We can do whatever we want. This is our space.
And I don't have a ton of answers about. I have some ideas that I think are good ideas, obviously, but I don't have answers. And I feel like as a community and as colleagues, as people who are teaching fertility awareness, that this conversation needs to happen more, which is around gaining consent to collect data from our own bodies in a way that can objectify and other our physiology. So what I'm talking about is the reality that so many of us are used to treating our bodies as a thing, as an object that we own, rather than a sentient, intelligent organism that we happen to like inhabit our consciousness in a small portion of, but like most of our cells are not even our own.
Right.
That we're getting to a place where we are gaining true consent from ourselves before we are objectifying and extracting data from ourselves. And I think that this has to, the sacred yes is a piece of this puzzle, because going into the etymology of consent, it's feeling together, con together, sentir, feeling. And so actually coming to a place where you have a visceral or emotional yes and a desire to interact with your fertile sexual body in a way that you are going to be analyzing and collecting data from it, making sure that we actually have some kind of emotional and psycho-spiritual presence and alignment and sense of embodiment in that process. And I think that asking the questions about what our sacred yes is, what we do want to conceive and gestate with our fertile sexual bodies, is a piece of that puzzle to help not make fertility awareness one more thing that we are objectifying our bodies about, or being reductionist, where we are seeing ourselves and our value and our functionality as a set of data rather than something that we are actually experiencing and having feelings and making meaning about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I like where you're going with that. It reminds me, I mean, again, like, it's something that came up in my training a lot with Geraldine. It's like, well, how do you not further commodify the female body specifically? You know, any body, but specifically a uterus having physiology, because it's so commodified in all these ways. And how do you not operate out of fear? So, but it's so interesting you say that, and I really am going to think about this more as a practitioner, because whether or not we're doing that practice, people have that reaction. So going back to like the irritation, it's also a resistance. And I know this about myself too. Like, don't look at my charts as an example of how you should live. But, you know, but also like, it's a lifestyle practice. So like, guys, do what you need to do. But yeah, there is a resistance that comes up. And perhaps part of that resistance is like, you're not fully consenting to this. Like, there is a part of you that's like, I think this is a good idea. And I'm clearly interested and want to do this, but I might not be fully there yet. And I think that really applies to sex as well, right? So like, you're like, I'm attracted to you and I would like to put my naked body next to your naked body. Yeah. And then you're there, and then you're like, well, or however that works for you. Maybe you want to put your naked bodies together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you want, if the person has a penis and you have a vagina, you want the penis in your vagina right now. Maybe it doesn't. Yeah. Maybe that, or maybe you do, whatever it is. You're still like, and maybe your goal is like, eventually in your brain, you're like, eventually at some point, I think it would be nice to have your penis in my vagina, but I'm not there yet now. And so that is part of the consent conversation, is like, I'm open to these things and I'm a hell yes to this. But the rest of these other things over here, I like the idea of them theoretically. I'm not like a no forever, but I'm a no right now. And I like that you bring that up, because I think that is definitely what's happening with people, where you're like, you don't want to chart, you forget to chart, because there's all these ways we display resistance or display non-consent for ourselves too. You know, it's and you just if you're aware of it, then you can say, you know, hold it with compassion and say, I want to chart, but like, I don't want to do it. I'm not feeling it. And like, there's something in me. And as a practitioner, as a teacher, as an educator, whatever I am, and you, all of us, right? It's like your responsibility, I would say my responsibility, and that is to be with you where you're at. And so if you're not charting perfectly, it's fine. You know, you have that piece of information that you're not collecting maybe all the data you need to make a fully informed choice about your sexuality. You're like,
don't perform in your vagina while you're figuring that shit out.
Exactly. And there's ways around that. And so like, there's no need for fear of perfection. And again, like, if pregnancy happens, there's other things that can be done. So there's like, again, removing what can feel like monumental, like I have to do it this way, right? Like, especially in a schooling situation. It's like,
abolish the police, including the cop in your head.
There you go. Exactly. And then give yourself some grace. Don't lock yourself up. So I love that. I actually really, you're really turning my brain like you do.
Well, and also just with the feeling together as the actual etymological accurate definition of consent, getting rid of this legal, medical, institutional version of consent, where consent is getting permission to do something to someone or for someone, when in actuality, consent should be feeling together.
Yeah.
Totally fucking different thing to feel together than to give somebody permission to do something to you or for you.
Yeah.
And what this speaks to, again, which is like so important in my work, even though, as I said before, I do my very best to like have a very solid foundation of physiology and understanding of the body, is that we have to have the conversations about what our mind and our spirit are doing and feeling and the meaning that we are making, and that we have to be making these decisions and we have to be moving with a state of moving towards alignment with our mind, our body, and our spirit. And if you only operate on one of those levels, you're going to experience some level of pain or suffering or disconnect that is going to be harmful if you try and only operate on one of those levels. So this meaning making, right? And this feeling together, you're feeling together with your body. You're feeling together with your cervix and your cervical fluids. And that thermometer, when you're temping yourself, you have to be feeling like, yes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're still just imposing an external authority's construct on how to behave correctly and what to do to be good. And that is harmful and abusive.
Yeah. And that's like so desperate. What my, like, again, Geraldine, to be like your little daughter of the patriarchy. You're just like my little daughter of the patriarchy self. And then the other thing that she'll say is, gotta watch out, because the dick of the patriarchy will just slip in your mouth and you gotta stop. It just slips in so easy.
Oh.
But
yeah, consent with anything and everything ever entering your vagina or your mouth.
Or like anywhere. Yeah. Any orifice.
That'd be nice. And then just, we need to, as educators, be really addressing the fact that dissociation and sexual trauma and depersonalization and PTSD and complex PTSD are the current cultural norms.
Yep. Going back to that.
Whether or not they're physiologically universal, right? Our 3 primary fertility signals, those are universal truths in their physiology, right? But our cultural norm right now is that the vast majority of people are dissociated from their vaginas.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we offer this information in a way where we're not perpetuating the harm of objectifying your body?
Yeah. And on that note too, like the norm is for most of us to have actually problematic cycles. Like it is normal for you to have painful cycles, to not be ovulating for all these different reasons.
Yes.
And so then it also goes into this other part of commodifying, but also judging yourself and saying like, I don't have a textbook cycle. Like what's wrong with me? What is wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. I'm bad. All these things. So it is
so much psychology and like, there's so much depth.
Yeah. Again, we think it's just like, oh, you're just over there touching your cervical fluids and taking your temperature. And like, no, you're having a really crazy experience, honestly, with your body. It's like, it's a whole full on, like I said, it's psychoactive.
Yeah.
And
it's informative. And it ideally, hopefully with the right support and witnessing and meaning making and feeling together, like it can be wildly empowering and transformative in a really beautiful way.
Yeah.
But a lot of us have a lot of undoing to be able to get there. And sometimes the process of practicing cycle or fertility awareness can help get there. But I think having these conversations about true consent, having these conversations about the sacred yes and the alignment of our mind, body, and spirit need to be normalized as part of the intake and part of the prerequisite to these practices.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely making me think about some new ways of how to adjust and evolve my client.
Oh.
Yeah. Ooh, Sam, you're so good at this.
This is like a new stuff.
Yeah.
Like a lot of what I'm sharing with you is like, because we have the level of connection and intimacy we do, like a lot of interviews, I'm just like, this is the things that I always say. And I'm like, talking about this trauma-informed approach and being in this state of alignment where we're not extracting data and not objectifying and perpetuating these ideas of like how our bodies should function and how we extract value from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are relatively new, like to the last year.
Well, and I think they're very important. I would also say they're probably the hardest thing to do, right? So like this part of like, how do I, because I think it becomes potentially like consent is a lot clearer when you're dealing with another person. Because generally speaking, even those of us who don't have the world's best boundaries, you probably have better boundaries with another person than you do with yourself. So even going back to this idea of like self-talk, right? So you are, seeing something posted on Instagram or just people saying like, you are your own worst critic.
Yeah.
And for my own self, like sometimes being in my own head by myself is not the safest place to be.
Yeah.
And there's empathy and compassion and love I would extend to other people that I do not always extend to myself. And I know many other people are in that same way. And that makes me sad, but that's the state of things. And I will push my own body into places that I wouldn't do to someone else. So like, for example, classic example, I really need to pee, and not right now, but like in general, like this feeling of like, I need to pee and I'm not peeing. There's a toilet.
Just had a conversation with a client this morning.
Yeah, there's a toilet 10 steps away from me and I'm not going to pee because I'm doing something else that I'd rather do. And that's harmful to my body.
Yes.
Fully consenting, or like I'm making a choice to tell my body it cannot have the function that it's like, hey, it's time to pee. We don't have to pee all the time. It's just now we need to do it.
Yeah. Even
that's so hard. And so recognizing that like that relationship with self is going to be like, it's a lifelong relationship. It evolves.
The most important one.
It's the most important one. And therefore it is also like the potentially the hardest one to have.
Yeah.
And understanding like what consent is in your own body for yourself is challenging, and so much like there's so much to undo there. And just like what you think you're capable of or what you've pushed yourself to be capable of, and then come to this state of like you're in a state of pathology, but it's your normal. And so you're like, well, this is fine. Like I was listening to someone else talk about this other situation, but basically she had like pushed herself to this point through work where everyone around her could say like, you are falling apart, and she's like, no, I'm fine. And she was like, I had gotten to a point in which I had that was my normal. At which point, like, if I had not been forcibly stopped by other people, I would have killed myself, or I would have just died of something else. And we do that. And so I don't know, it is a heavy thing. And it's a thing that I would say, like, this is where you have a team, right? So like one practitioner probably can't do all this for you. So if it was my own client, I would say like, you should have a therapist, and you should have some kind of exercise practice, and you should have some kind of, like all these different things. And you should have a doctor, and you should have a consultant,
right.
A variety of, all these.
And I don't want to put like all of the trauma resolution onto fertility awareness educators, but I also feel like being trauma informed needs to be more part of the conversation in the education, and that people need to be given that support and permission to experience whatever they feel in terms of resistance, and listen to it, and not be a cop in their own head about it.
But I completely agree with you. I think being trauma informed is definitely still a growth edge for myself, but I think it's critical, because it does have to do with like, we start talking again, you think you're just charting your cycle to like learn when you can't get pregnant, but actually then you begin to engage with your entire reproductive self. And reproduction is something, there's all kinds of trauma everywhere, but that is one that, if you have a female body, if you have a uterus, if you have a vagina, has all kinds of like both personal, your lived own trauma, and the trauma of so many people who came before you, either genetically related to you or cultural, or just like existing in this world. So you start to engage with all those parts when you engage with your fertility in this way, which is why it's so nice to be like, can I just have a pill, please? Because I don't want to think about it, because like it's too much. And in knowing like, it's a lot to hold, but
it's your power, honey.
It's your power, right?
Yeah, it's hard to know how powerful you are. And there's, like some corny, there's great, I don't know if it's Marianne Williamson or if it was misattributed to her and it was actually, anyway, the one like, we're secretly afraid of our own greatest power kind of thing.
Yeah.
I feel I can't tell you like how many moments of like multiple cycles of years and progression into birth work and into teaching fertility awareness of like just hitting these walls where I'm just like, I can't believe they fooled everybody into thinking that this is our weakness instead of our power, or that this is the most painful and difficult part of being alive instead of the most magical, pleasurable, powerful leverage that we have in our culture and in our relationships and all of these things, our ability to actually have embodiment and choice and awareness within these and not outsource our power and our authority to a pharmaceutical company, which I can't tell people often enough that the company that's making most of the synthetic hormonal contraceptive methods on the market is the same company that made the gas chambers in the Holocaust.
Yeah. Yeah.
The same company. And the same company that is patenting many, many seeds. And that the connection between food and reproductive sovereignty and justice can't be overstated.
Yeah.
And like totally radically shifting our food systems is not something that's super accessible for a lot of us. We can make baby steps for sure, support your local farmer's market, like grow a veggie garden. There's little steps, but like the way that we relate to our fertility in our bodies is something that is so much more within our realm of power than changing the food system completely. And it's activism, and it's anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal activism to take 100% responsibility for your fertility without relying on an external authority, without relying on consumer culture at all. And I want to say, like, absolutely, I want to give total respect to the, like, when you know better, you do better. And that there's harm reduction reasons for taking pills or having IUDs. Sometimes they are the most effective tool, and we can't really invest our intellect or our emotional body in contemplating and being present with our sexuality and reproduction. Like, I understand that that's triggering as fuck for a lot of people and it's not their priority. But I also want to know that, like, people to know that it's a potential way to be an activist also.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly
stick it to the man. Just like, I don't need any of your shit. I need none of it.
And I will say, like, that is kind of like that feeling, that like radical feeling at that point where you're like, this thing that you have held over my head, which is my fertility. It's actually like, I don't care what you have to say. I don't need anything to manage it. I have the knowledge within myself and access to those resources or whatever I might need that I can do outside of a system that tells me yes or no. So like I can get access to herbs that perhaps, no one seems to know exactly what they do or how they work. Or like I can get access to vitamin C, or I can know my fertility, and therefore all your laws around how I'm supposed to control my fertility don't apply. And then, also the other side of that coin, which goes to like the food part, right, is this whole other, I would say, like, there's this whole other aspect of fertility that, like under the banner of reproductive justice, this idea that like, it's not actually just about your fertility. It's not just actually about like whether or not you make a baby. It's like all the steps that happen after and between. And that is like 100. And so I feel like reproductive justice is one of the best lenses for many of these things because it encompasses so many things. So it's like the right to bodily autonomy, the right to be a parent, the right to not be a parent, and the right to parent those children with safety and dignity, which of course comes out of Sister Song Collective, which is a woman of color organization, was founded by Black women in the 1990s. So thank you to them for, expanding the conversation in tangible, like in important, like again, like this idea of like, what are we actually talking about here? We're not like pro-choice, right? There's that. And so reproductive justice is an answer to like the pro-choice movement, which was largely like by and for white women.
Right.
And we have these Black women who came through and said like, but what are we actually talking about? We're not just talking about like, this is like a piece of the conversation, but it's not the whole conversation. So like that grounding it. And then that brings into, again, like all this other activism that people might be doing in their lives or finding important. Environmentalism, like what is happening with the climate directly impacts these things and directly impacts our bodies. And so you can see like it all, I just feel like the fertility awareness aspect of it all, the fertility understanding of it is like the tiny microcosm of you and how a thing that you can control.
Yes.
Like, of the things that are outside your control, like that's a thing that you can manage, right? Versus like, to your point, you can't change the food system tomorrow, but you could pick up and start doing fertility awareness tomorrow. And how does that change your life? And what does that mean for you? And, if there's nothing else, again, like if there's nothing else you can do, or if you feel like you are hopeless and you feel like there's not anything else, like the world is falling apart and it's on fire and it's all trash, what you can do something about is how you relate to yourself.
Yeah, that's a great spot to close.
Yeah, I think so. Well, so this was lovely. Thank you so much for being here. Again, I've just learned so. I always learn something, like reading or listening to you. Sam also has a Patreon, so you should go and join her Patreon because it's chock full of all kinds of great things. Do you want to speak a little bit to the Patreon?
My Patreon. You can read Please Bleed on there in draft form, as well as a whole bunch of my other works in progress. And I do a monthly Ask Me Anything live Q&A there for everybody. So you can give as little as $1 and see a lot of my works in progress and come to my Ask Me Anything sessions. And then higher tiers, you have more and more access to more in-depth courses and books that I'm working on. And the ability to ask a question ahead of time instead of show up to the live. And moving forward, hopefully by January, I will have my life in a space where I'm going to start doing pay what you can one-on-one sessions again. And that will be just for my patrons. They won't be available to the general public.
Awesome. Yeah. So go check out Sam's Patreon and all of her work, including Please Bleed, which will be out as an ebook shortly. Yeah.
By the end of the month, I'm pretty certain. Certainly by 2021.
Yeah. And it's like this concept of birthrights. This is a birthright. You have the right to information.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for
promote menstruation and avoid abortions. It's within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah.
Without pills. I want to clarify that also.
Yeah. And with your own body, be your own birth control.
Be your own birth control and get support from elders, which are plants because they're sentient and they're our elders and they can totally help.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for being here. Thank you everyone who watched live or are watching the replay. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Happy Hanukkah. I'm gonna go practice my prayers. I'm a little rusty. Gotta get those candle blessings.
Great. I'm gonna play the outro. Have a happy Hanukkah and prayers.
Oh, yeah. Bye, ladies.
Your cunt is special, there's so much to love. You and your pussy should fit like hand in glove. Whether it belongs to you or your lover, there is so much to discover. See you next time, the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.